the boy may never speak again. The doctor's words fell across the glass-walled library like a blade. Millionaire hotel developer Richard Whitmore stood beside the fireplace, still wearing the black suit from an emergency board meeting. Across the room, his 9-year-old son, Noah, sat beneath the cold white light of a floor lamp, staring at the rain sliding down the windows. 5 years. 5 years since anyone had heard his voice. Richard's hand tightened around the medical report. He had hired the best specialists in New York, London, and Boston. He had built a private therapy room inside the mansion. He had paid for machines, tutors, counselors, and experimental programs. Nothing had brought his son back. "We've done everything," Richard said, his voice cracking despite his effort to control it. The doctor closed his leather case. Sometimes silence becomes the only place a child feels safe. Before Richard could answer, a sudden crash came from the hallway. A silver tray struck the marble floor. A cup rolled in a slow circle, spilling warm milk across the polished stone. Standing beside it was Elena Cruz, the new housekeeper. Her uniform was slightly too large. Her shoes were old, their leather creased and faded. One hand trembled as she reached down to collect the broken pieces. Behind her stood Mrs. Harrow, the mansion's severe household manager. "I warned you," Mrs. Harrow snapped. "You were told never to come near this wing." "I'm sorry," Elena whispered. "I heard someone crying." "No one was crying," Richard said. Elena looked toward the library. Noah had turned his face away, but his shoulders were shaking. Richard crossed the hallway, anger rising through his grief. He had dismissed 3 caregivers that year for ignoring instructions. He would not allow another stranger to disturb his son. "You're fired," he said. Elena froze. She had been working at the mansion for only 4 days. Her entire life seemed to fit inside the worn canvas bag hanging from her shoulder. Through its open zipper, Richard noticed the corner of an old photograph and a small blue music box scratched with age. "Please, Mr. Whitmore," Elena said. "I need this job." "That isn't my problem." Mrs. Harrow moved toward her. "Security will escort you out." Then the lights flickered. Thunder shook the windows, deep enough to make Noah cover his ears. His breathing became sharp and uneven. The doctor stepped forward, but the boy backed into the wall, terrified by every hand reaching for him. "Don't touch him," Elena said. Every person in the hallway stared at her. Richard's face hardened. "You don't tell me how to care for my son." Elena slowly placed her bag on the floor. The blue music box slipped out, opening when it struck the marble. A fragile melody filled the hallway. Noah stopped trembling. Elena stared at him as if she had seen a ghost. Then, almost without realizing it, she began to sing. The song was soft, old, and unfamiliar to everyone except Richard. His face lost all color. It was the lullaby his late wife had written for Noah, a song no one outside their family had ever heard. And as Elena reached the final line, Noah lifted his head, opened his mouth, and whispered one word. "Mommy." For several seconds, no one moved. The rain continued tapping against the tall windows. The broken cup lay forgotten on the marble floor. Even the doctor seemed afraid to breathe. Richard stared at his son. Noah had not spoken loudly. The word had barely been more than air. But Richard had heard it. Everyone had. "Say it again," Richard whispered. Noah lowered his eyes. The silence returned. Richard took one step toward him, but Noah immediately pressed himself against the wall. The old fear came back into his face, and the fragile moment vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Elena stopped singing. She looked down at the blue music box near her feet, then slowly picked it up. Mrs. Harrow broke the silence first. "This is some kind of trick." Elena's expression tightened. "I didn't know he would speak." Richard turned toward her. "How do you know that song?" She did not answer. The doctor watched Noah carefully. The boy was no longer trembling. His eyes remained fixed on the music box in Elena's hands. "Mr. Whitmore," the doctor said quietly, "whatever just happened, it reached him." Richard barely heard him. His mind had already gone back 5 years, to the last winter of his wife's life. Claire had written that lullaby while sitting beside Noah's bed. She had never recorded it. She had never performed it publicly. Richard himself remembered only fragments. Yet Elena had sung every word. "Come with me," Richard said. Mrs. Harrow objected. She should be removed from the property. Not yet. Richard led Elena into his office at the end of the hall. The room was lined with awards, photographs of hotels, and framed magazine covers bearing his name. Elena stood beneath them in her oversized uniform, looking smaller than ever. Richard shut the door. "Start talking." Elena held the music box against her chest. "My mother used to sing that song." Richard gave a cold laugh. "That's impossible. She learned it from someone years ago." "Who?" Elena hesitated. Then she opened her canvas bag and took out the old photograph Richard had noticed earlier. The picture was faded and bent at the corners. It showed 2 young women standing outside a small neighborhood clinic. One was Elena's mother, Maria. The other woman had blonde hair, a gentle smile, and one hand resting protectively over her pregnant stomach. Richard's breath stopped. It was Claire. Elena placed the photograph on the desk. "My mother cleaned rooms at that clinic," she said. "Mrs. Whitmore was there for several weeks before Noah was born." Richard picked up the photograph with a trembling hand. Claire had never mentioned Maria. "She was kind to my mother," Elena continued. "When everyone else treated her like she was invisible, your wife learned her name." Richard looked at her sharply. "Why do you have the music box?" Elena's eyes dropped. "Because my mother gave it to me before she died." The hardness in Richard's face weakened for a moment. Elena explained that Maria had raised her alone in a 1-room apartment above a laundromat in Queens. They had little money, but music filled their home. Maria sang while washing dishes, while mending clothes, and on nights when the heating stopped working. The blue music box had been Elena's most precious possession. After Maria died, Elena carried it everywhere. "I sing that song when I'm afraid," she said. Richard looked again at the photograph. "Why didn't you tell me any of this when you applied for the job?" Elena gave him a tired, almost embarrassed smile. "Because rich people don't hire housekeepers for their memories." Before Richard could respond, the office door slowly opened. Noah stood in the hallway. He was barefoot, still holding the edge of his sleeve in one hand. His eyes were not on his father. They were on Elena. She knelt but did not move closer. Noah looked at the music box, then touched his throat. Elena understood. "You want me to sing again?" Noah gave the smallest nod. And for the first time in 5 years, he walked willingly toward another person. By morning, the mansion had changed. Not in any way the guests arriving for Richard Whitmore's charity luncheon would notice. The silver still shone. The roses were still arranged in perfect white circles. The staff still moved through the halls with quiet precision. But upstairs, behind the closed doors of the family wing, Noah was sitting beside Elena on the carpet. She had sung the lullaby 3 times. He had not spoken again. Still, he had stayed. That alone felt impossible. Richard watched from the doorway, torn between hope and suspicion. For 5 years, specialists had needed weeks just to convince Noah to remain in the same room. Elena had done it with an old music box and a song she should never have known. Mrs. Harrow stood beside him, her mouth set in a thin line. "This is dangerous," she murmured. Richard kept his eyes on Noah. He trusts her. He knew her for 4 days. He spoke. Mrs. Harrow turned toward him. Or she made him believe something that wasn't true. The words landed exactly where Richard was weakest. That afternoon, he called Elena into the formal dining room. The long table had been cleared. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, but the room felt colder than before. On the polished surface lay a folder containing her employment records, her address, and the name of every family she had worked for. Elena remained standing. Richard did not invite her to sit. "You left your last job after 6 weeks," he said. "The family moved. You worked at another house for 3 months. The father stopped paying the staff." Mrs. Harrow placed a second document on the table. "And this?" she asked. Elena looked down. It was an old report from a private residence where she had once been accused of stealing jewelry. The case had been dismissed, but the accusation remained in the file like a stain. Richard's expression hardened. "You came into my home carrying a photograph of my wife. You knew a private song. Then my son spoke for the first time in 5 years." Elena slowly lifted her eyes. "You think I planned it? I think I don't know you." The hurt in her face was quiet, but unmistakable. "I never stole anything," she said. Mrs. Harrow leaned forward. "Then why did they accuse you?" "Because I was poor, and I was there." Richard looked away. There was no anger in Elena's voice. That made it harder to dismiss. Before he could respond, Noah appeared in the doorway. He was holding the blue music box. Elena's face changed. She had left it on the dresser upstairs. Noah walked into the room and placed it in front of Richard. Then he reached inside Elena's canvas bag, which Mrs. Harrow had brought down for inspection. From beneath a folded sweater, he pulled out a small cloth pouch. Mrs. Harrow seized it. Inside was a diamond bracelet. Richard's stomach dropped. The bracelet belonged to Claire. It had been locked in the upstairs memorial cabinet. Mrs. Harrow stared at Elena in triumph. "I knew it." Elena went pale. "I've never seen that before." Richard's voice became cold. "Security is on the way." Noah shook his head violently. Elena stepped back as 2 guards entered the room. She did not argue. She did not cry. She simply looked at Noah and said softly, "It's all right." Then Noah did something no one expected. He grabbed Elena's hand, pressed it against his chest, and refused to let go. Noah's fingers locked around Elena's hand so tightly that his knuckles turned white. One of the guards reached for him. "Don't," Richard said. The room fell still. Noah stood between Elena and the door, breathing hard, his small body trembling with the effort of holding his ground. He looked at the diamond bracelet on the table, then at his father. Richard crouched. "Noah, did you put it in her bag?" The boy's lips moved, but no sound came. Mrs. Harrow folded her arms. "He's confused. She has manipulated him." Elena looked at Noah's frightened face. "No," she said quietly. "He's trying to tell us something." Richard's patience snapped. "My wife's bracelet was found in your bag. And your son brought it here himself." The words stopped him. Elena slowly knelt beside Noah. She did not touch him. She simply watched his eyes. Every time Richard mentioned the bracelet, Noah stared toward the family wing. Every time Mrs. Harrow accused Elena, he touched his throat. But when the blue music box chimed softly on the table, his gaze shifted toward the old photograph beside Richard's hand. Elena suddenly understood. "The photograph," she whispered. She picked it up and turned it over. On the back, written in faded blue ink, were 6 words. "For the day he finds his voice." Richard took the picture from her. He had never seen the message. Elena opened the music box and gently lifted the velvet lining. Beneath it was a thin brass key taped inside the wooden base. Mrs. Harrow stepped forward. "What is that?" Elena stared at the key. "My mother never knew." Noah pulled at Elena's sleeve and pointed upstairs. They followed him through the silent mansion. He led them past his bedroom, past the therapy room, and into Claire's memorial room. Her dresses remained behind glass. Her books were arranged exactly as she had left them. On the far wall stood the cabinet where the bracelet had supposedly been locked. Noah walked past it. Instead, he stopped before an old wooden chest beneath the window. Richard's face tightened. Claire had brought that chest from the clinic before Noah was born. After her death, Richard had never been able to open it. The lock had no visible manufacturer, and he could not bear to have it broken. Elena inserted the brass key. It turned. Inside were dozens of letters, childhood drawings, and a small handheld recorder wrapped in Claire's pale blue scarf. Noah backed away as if the recorder frightened him. Richard pressed the button. Static filled the room. Then Claire's voice emerged. "If you're hearing this, then Maria kept her promise." Richard's knees nearly gave way. Claire explained that during her difficult pregnancy, Maria had sat beside her through long nights at the clinic. When Claire feared she would not survive, she gave Maria the music box, the photograph, and the key. But the recording soon changed. Claire's voice became weaker. Richard, Noah did not stop speaking because he forgot how. He stopped because of what he heard the night I died. Richard looked at his son. Noah had been 4 years old. Claire continued. He heard me arguing with someone in the hallway. Someone who told me that if I exposed what had happened at the foundation, you would lose everything. Mrs. Harrow went pale. Noah saw it. His whole body stiffened. Then he pointed directly at her. Mrs. Harrow stepped back. He doesn't know what he's doing. Noah opened his mouth. For 5 years, fear had sealed every word inside him. Now, with Elena beside him and his mother's voice filling the room, the boy finally forced the truth out. She took Mommy's bracelet. No one breathed. Noah pointed again, tears streaming down his face. And she told me if I ever spoke, Daddy would disappear too. Richard turned toward Mrs. Harrow so slowly that the movement felt more frightening than anger. For years, she had controlled every key, every schedule, every visitor, every room in the mansion. She had stood beside him at Claire's funeral. She had comforted him when Noah stopped speaking. She had even helped choose the doctors who later called the boy's silence permanent. Now her face looked empty. That child is confused, she said. Noah flinched at her voice. Elena immediately moved between them. Richard noticed it then. She did not stand like an employee protecting her job. She stood like someone who recognized fear because she had lived beside it. The recorder continued playing. Claire's voice revealed that she had discovered money missing from the Whitmore Foundation, a charity created to help low-income mothers and children. Mrs. Harrow had been using false invoices and private accounts, believing no one would question a trusted household manager. Claire had confronted her. Noah had heard everything from the hallway. The bracelet had not been stolen for its value. Mrs. Harrow had taken it because Claire had hidden a small memory card inside its clasp. It contained copies of financial records. When Elena arrived, carrying Claire's photograph and Maria's music box, Mrs. Harrow realized the past had returned. She had placed the bracelet in Elena's bag to remove her before anyone opened the chest. Richard's hands shook as he closed the recorder. You watched my son suffer for 5 years. Mrs. Harrow said nothing. Security escorted her from the room while Richard stood frozen beside the chest. He had spent millions trying to repair Noah's silence, yet the person feeding that silence had lived under his roof. Noah remained close to Elena. He had spoken, but now he seemed exhausted by the weight of it. His eyes drifted toward the music box in her hand. Richard looked at Elena. How did you know what he needed? She sat on the floor beside Noah, her old shoes tucked beneath her. My mother stopped speaking when I was 10. Richard stared at her. Elena explained that after Maria was falsely accused of stealing medication from the clinic, she lost her job and nearly lost custody of her daughter. For months, shame and fear swallowed her voice. Doctors spoke around her. Employers treated her as guilty. Neighbors avoided her. But Claire had not. She visited their apartment one winter evening carrying groceries, a warm coat, and proof that Maria had been framed by another employee. The old photograph had been taken that same day. She didn't save us with money, Elena said. She saved us by believing my mother before the truth became convenient. Maria slowly began speaking again. At night, Claire's lullaby helped calm her when fear returned. Before she died years later, Maria made Elena promise something. If you ever meet someone trapped inside silence, she had said, don't force the door open. Sit outside it until they know they're not alone. Richard lowered his head. All the specialists had asked Noah to perform. To repeat sounds. To prove progress. Elena had asked for nothing. She had simply sung. Noah reached for the music box and turned its tiny silver handle. The melody floated through the memorial room, soft and imperfect. Then he looked at his father. Dad, he whispered. Richard's face broke. He dropped to his knees and pulled his son into his arms, but gently, leaving Noah enough space to move away. This time, Noah did not. Over Richard's shoulder, the boy looked at Elena. Please don't leave, he said. Elena smiled through her tears. But Richard knew that after everything he had done, accusing her, firing her, allowing her humiliation, asking her to stay would require more than an apology. By the following morning, the mansion no longer felt like a monument to grief. Sunlight poured across the marble floors. The curtains in Noah's bedroom had been opened for the first time in years, and somewhere downstairs, staff members whispered about the sound they had all thought they would never hear again. Noah's voice. It was still quiet. Sometimes only one word came. Sometimes fear closed around him again. But now, when silence returned, no one treated it like failure. Elena was packing her canvas bag when Richard found her in the servants' quarters. Her uniform was folded neatly on the bed. The old photograph rested beside the blue music box. You're leaving, he said. Elena did not turn around. I think that's best. Richard stood in the doorway without his usual tailored jacket. For once, he looked less like a millionaire and more like a tired father who had finally understood how much he had missed. I was wrong about you. Elena closed the bag. You were afraid. That doesn't excuse what I did. No, she said softly. It doesn't. Richard nodded. He had prepared speeches for investors, judges, politicians, and thousands of employees. But standing before a housekeeper in a small room, he struggled to find the right words. I treated your poverty like evidence against you, he said. And I treated my wealth like proof that I understood everything. Elena finally looked at him. Richard placed a folder on the bed. Inside was an offer, but not for another housekeeping position. He wanted Elena to help establish a new family support program through the Whitmore Foundation, one designed for children dealing with grief, fear, and emotional trauma. She would work with licensed professionals, receive training, and help families remember that healing was not always about forcing someone to speak. Elena stared at the papers. I'm not a therapist. No, Richard said. You're the person who noticed what all of us missed. She looked toward the hallway. Noah stood there in his pajamas, holding Claire's blue scarf. You're really going? He asked. The sentence was slow and uneven. But it was a full sentence. Elena knelt. I didn't want to stay where I wasn't trusted. Noah looked at his father. Richard lowered his eyes. She has every reason to leave. The boy walked toward Elena and handed her the scarf. Then trust her now. Richard felt the words deeper than any accusation. Elena wrapped the scarf around the music box. After a long moment, she placed the bag back on the bed. I'll stay, she said, but not because you're rich. A small smile appeared on Richard's face. I understand. In the months that followed, the stolen foundation money was recovered. Mrs. Harrow was charged, and the families harmed by the fraud received the help they had been promised. Elena completed professional training and helped open the Claire and Maria Center, named after the two women whose small act of friendship had crossed years, grief, and social class. Noah began attending school again. He did not become the loudest child in the room. He never needed to. At the center's opening ceremony, he stood beside his father before a crowd of reporters. Elena waited near the stage, wearing simple shoes that were no longer worn through. Richard leaned toward his son. "You don't have to say anything." Noah looked at Elena, then at the blue music box displayed beneath his mother's photograph. He stepped toward the microphone. "My mom taught Elena a song," he said. "Elena taught me I was safe." The entire room went silent. Then Noah smiled. "And my dad learned to listen." Sometimes the person who changes a life is not the one with the most money, power, or education. Sometimes it is simply the person who sits beside a closed door and refuses to let someone feel alone. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that kindness is never wasted. And tell us in the comments, who was the person who believed in you when others did not? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that remind us what truly makes a person rich.